Good afternoon and welcome to CIPR TV on Wednesday the 14th of September with me, Russell Goldsmith, and Gemma Griffiths. Now, the day-to-day bravery of our police officers is never in doubt, but the principle of policing by consent, by relying on minimal force and using the support of the society of whom the police are very much a part of, means that public perception of policing and managing the reputation of the police services has become a vital part in enabling them to do an effective job.
This week saw the appointment of Bernard Hogan Howe as the new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. He'll be facing up to the challenges of the summer in which widespread public disorder, disquiet over informal relationships between the police and the media has put the reputation of the police under heavy focus. Added to this is the reduction in police budgets of over 20% in the lifetime of this Parliament.
Now, for today's show, we are joined in the studio by Anne Campbell, Head of Corporate Communications at Norfolk and Suffolk Constabularies and Chair of the Association of Police Communicators. And we also have Andrea Newman, Assistant Director of Communications at the Association of Chief Police Officers. If you have a question that you'd like to put to either of our guests on any comment or have any comments on the discussion, you can send them to us in the usual way by either submitting the question using the submission box on the page or tweeting using the hashtag #CIPRtv, and we'll do our best to include them in the show.
So welcome to you both, thanks for joining us. Maybe we could just spend 30 seconds talking about your organisations and what they do. So maybe Andrea, you could go first.
Well, more commonly known as APCO, the Association of Chief Police Officers is the national strategic body that represents police forces across the UK. So really it's our role to work with stakeholders such as government and with the Home Affairs Select Committee to represent forces across the country, so all 44 forces, England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
And Anne?
Okay, well I'm here today as Chair of the Association of Police Communicators, and that's a nationwide organisation that represents all those people who are effectively providing a bridge between policing and the general public, and also the groups and individuals that influence the opinions of the public about policing today. Of course, it's an extremely complex business, and we try to demystify policing for, as I say, the public and the media and a whole range of stakeholders. So
you talk about police communicators. Could you give us an overview of their maybe day-to-day role and the challenges that they face?
Okay, well today most police forces have a number of communicators working as a team. A lot of the staff come traditionally now from journalism or marketing or PR, usually one of the creative disciplines. And of course we're supporting not just police operations, i.e. the day-to-day business, which might be drugs raids, frontline policing, patrols, major crimes, road accidents. We're also supporting the senior teams who are delivering their strategies to the public. So we're advising the senior teams too, including chief police officers, on how to get their message across to the local public and the local people that they serve. And of course it sounds easy, but actually it's pretty tough.
I mean, there's a number of stakeholders that you mentioned there. How do you prioritise and, you know, get your day-to-day sort of like priorities set?
Okay, I think that's a really interesting question, because when I first joined the police about 20 years ago now, our focus for communicators was very much just on managing or handling the media. Now, of course, there's been a sea change, because we've recognised that actually in order to get our message across, we don't just need to rely on the media. We need to be creating those relationships with ourselves, so with the general public, with our partners, with the other agencies that we work with, so district councils, county councils, the other emergency services. So there's a host of people we work with to try and get our message across to a range of stakeholders, and of course an increasing important audience too is the people that work within our forces and the police authorities that regulate us. So yeah, it's challenging.
I can imagine.
And what about the role with social media in all of that communication? I mean, what kind of platforms do you use, when, what's appropriate?
Okay, and I know we're going to talk about that in more detail a bit later on, but certainly police are very much embracing social media now. I think it's fair to say that some forces got ahead of the game quite early on. For my own forces, we've been using Twitter for some considerable time. In fact, during the riots, we trained all our control rooms to be able to tweet 24/7. So commonly we're using Twitter. We've been using Facebook for a number of years too. So what I would say is there's a bit of a mixed picture across the country of use of social media, but there is absolutely no doubt that that is where the future is in terms of communication. As I say, there'll be some useful insights from that probably a bit later on too.
Okay, that ties nicely in with a question that we had from one of our colleagues on the CIPR panel, actually, which is, and we'll give him a name check, it's at Robin1966, that's his Twitter feed. There's a question that's come in previous to that though, which is from Gal Howard. So Anne, if we can stick with you, Andrea obviously will come to you in a second, but this is question is quite a long-winded one here, but she said, I work for an environment regulator and we can struggle to tell the story following a pollution incident, for example, because we are so restricted in what we can say from a legal point of view. How can you ensure that you keep the public and the media reassured that you're dealing with an issue when you can't tell them anything? Obviously they want to cause legal issues, so it's quite a tough one.
That is actually quite a common problem for us, because there's quite a lot about the nature of what we do that we can't reveal or talk about publicly. So we try and make sure that we gain the reassurance and the trust of the people we serve by making sure we have regular dialogues with them. So we may not be able to say something officially, but say for a media audience, I would be looking to give them a briefing that they wouldn't be able to publish, but that would help them to understand. So typically both our forces and police authorities, we're increasingly having sort of an encouraging public fora, meetings where we can discuss local issues and, as I say, demystify some of the things that we actually can't go into detail about, but by telling them why we can't go into that detail, then at least does help. But yeah, it's quite tricky sometimes.
You're nodding there, Andrea. Is that something?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think police communicators have to sort of tread a very fine line, to be honest. As Anne sort of rightly says, I mean, you know, we have to sort of manage the reputation of the service and the police force that we work for in Anne's case, and I think that, you know, you only have to look at the Joanna Yates murder last year in Avon and Somerset, and even more recently with the riots we had the case of Mark Duggan, and immediately these things are subject to sort of the rules and regulations that we're bound by in terms of an investigation or the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So we are sometimes bound by those rules, and we can't say very much. So
that must make it difficult then, going back to what we were saying about social media, because information is getting out there so quickly, and who's to know what's right and what's wrong?
I think the guidelines are quite simple for social media in a way. It's actually common sense. Let that be your guide, and basically don't say anything that you wouldn't actually want to say to your mum.
Yep.
So that gives you quite a lot of scope, but of course our communicators exist to help the police officers and other police staff to work within the guidelines, and that's part of our role, certainly to help and guide. Yeah, it just makes life very interesting.
Andrea, maybe if you can go back to the riots and social media, because I know that you played kind of a pivotal role in that. Maybe you could just talk about Robin's specific question was, how did social media help the police respond to the riots? So maybe you could talk us through that.
I think the riots have sort of thrown up a number of issues really, and we're also still learning from the recent experiences of the riots. I mean, firstly, they were unprecedented events for the police service to respond to, and this sort of notion of people using social media to mobilise themselves very quickly in this way was a fairly unique situation. And I think that what the police service has recognised since then is that there's probably more to do in terms of looking at how we can use social media as an intelligence tool. And I think equally it's absolutely invaluable in terms of offering community reassurance. I was at a meeting yesterday at the Home Office with industry representatives and police leaders and others, where they were discussing a lot of this, and people were giving their experiences of how they use social media during the riots. And it's really fascinating stuff. And I think in some of those instances, there weren't actually even any events, sort of looting or riots or anything like that. But what they were finding, there was a lot of rumours out there, and they were using social media as a means to reassure the public. And I think that makes it a really invaluable tool for the service.
So do you think you can use this experience and plan for such events in the future, so crisis events, or is it a case of these things just happen on a one-off and you have to react really quickly and plan?
I mean, I think absolutely. The nature of social media means it happens very quickly. So I think that some of the learning operationally for the police service that's come out of this is that we need to be able to respond very quickly and look at this medium more and understand it better and look at how we can use it better. I think one of the things that I heard from one of the senior officers that met most recently was, actually we use the word intelligence quite lightly. A lot of this wasn't intelligence, it's just chitter-chatter. So there's a huge volume of information that's coming through on these social networks, and it's a filtering process. But I certainly think that it's an area that, as Anne said, will become the future. I think what has come out of some of the initial lessons has been we need to be established on these networks and in these forums and mediums beforehand. There's no point trying to sort of get onto Twitter in the midst of a crisis. Yep. So there's a lot of learning there about sort of trying to take those measures in peacetime, as it were. Yeah. And I also think that it is something that needs some investment. I mean, I think the nature of social media is actually quite an inexpensive tool, but I think that perhaps there needs to be a bit more training and investment in staff to be able to utilise it, effectively. Well,
so social media aside, and we'll come on to sort of broadcast and press conferences in a second, because we've got some questions on that as well. But Anne, I'll put this to you. What are other qualities that police communicators need to possess in order to be effective in what you do?
Wow.
I mean, it's a very intense environment.
Yeah. It's pressured, it's a constant pressure because it's an operational environment, so there's stuff going on all the time. There's never any let-up. We never have time really much to plan, but as Andrea says, we do need to plan, and I think the thinking is now getting quite advanced in what we need to do to factor social media into our integrated communications plans. No doubt about that at all. But what qualities? I think you have to be agile. You certainly have to have a sense of humour, and actually just be quite resilient, because of course we're not in some quarters not the best loved public service, and there are those commentators that seem to want to sort of have the odd dig at us all the time. So we're fighting almost a relentless
thick-skinned as well. Then
you have to be extremely thick-skinned. But then again, as I say, it's part of the challenge. Yeah. There's one or two difficulties, but I think because we're quite a close-knit community as well, we very much share information, we work closely together, and actually that's also a strength. So maybe that's might be some of the things that we need to be.
Do you think more and more people who haven't traditionally been police communicators are interested in becoming communicators, and with the use of social media and that kind of thing, they want to get more involved, so you're training those guys as well?
Yeah, I'd say definitely, because years ago, before the likes of us civilians, if you like, came along, communications were just another arm of what police officers did. But then they realised that actually needed specialists, and I would like to say that APComm is further professionalising or helping to further professionalise that service. And we get quite a lot of inquiries from students, and particularly researchers who are also very interested in how we ply our trade. Because of course we're using all the principles that the CIPR members use, but in a very specialised way. So yeah, I think it's a privilege to do what we do, and we probably have an insight into a world that few other members of the public actually ever get to see.
You talked about the pressures just now, and obviously in our intro we were referring to events, and we've already discussed them in the summer. Do you think those pressures have increased on the team?
Well, I think they have, but what I also think has happened is that the public opinion has actually swung back a bit more in favour of us, because they saw some very graphic images on TV about police officers coming actually under attack too. And I think in a way that has swung that balance a bit more back towards us. I don't know if Andrea, you think the same or have a view on that?
I think if you look at actually, despite sort of the scrutiny that the police service is always under, I mean, you know, there's very rarely a policing story not in the headlines, and I think despite that scrutiny, actually, when you look at sort of public satisfaction indexes and surveys, policing is still up there as one of the most trusted professions, above politicians, above journalists. So actually, I think, you know, there's still a lot to be said for that, and obviously that confidence is paramount in terms of in what we do. And
that's actually another interesting thing. The research and the Home Office Insights has flagged that people trust information if it comes from the police. So our Twitter feeds with our APCO and our force crests on are actually a really important part of that communications mix.
I think, and there was a video on YouTube of a policeman getting involved in the Notting Hill Carnival, for instance, and dancing with the crowd, and that solicited such positive response about the bond between the community. And we're seeing more and more of that happening as well. So you can kind of feel a change, and you know that there is public confidence and trust out there.
But completely bizarrely, it turns out I actually know the person who's the dancing policeman, just by some strange conversation I had with a friend. Which is having laughed at it myself, and then found out that I knew him. But no, I think one of the kind of what we would say is that one of the sort of the strengths of British policing really is that, you know, if we get it wrong, kind of we're very quick to admit that we get it wrong, and I think that, you know, the police service has kind of said in recent weeks that, you know, there are lessons to be learned from this process and from the recent events, and if there are lessons, well, then we'll look at that and we will take account of that and we'll kind of move on. So I think, you know, there is a difficulty, certainly as communications professionals, because sometimes you feel like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So within the riots, you know, you saw a real kind of mix of, you know, what it's like to be at both ends, which is that sort of very positive, getting behind the police service and the brave acts that we saw, as Anne describes. And I think even the acting commissioner at the time was talking about people coming out and baking cakes and feeding them up and all this kind of thing. So you saw real public displays of affection for the police service and the work that they were doing in protecting those communities.
And actually a very small anecdote to that, because we sent police support units from Norfolk and Suffolk down to the Met, we were actually receiving tweets and emails of gratitude from, in fact, there were shoppers in Tesco's, because of course our guys and girls needed to get something to eat. So of course the Norfolk and Suffolk vans were out there with their insignia on, so we were actually getting bouquets from the public, and that was really heartwarming. So.
Well, before we go on to the next question, we've already sort of over 16-17 minutes into the show, so just a quick reminder, if you have got any questions, do keep sending them through into the box, or any tweets and comments, then #CIPRtv is the hashtag to use. So this one's for Andrea.
Next question. So you work for organisations that represent senior ranks of the police services. How do your members view relationship between reputation and effective policing? What's the balance? I
think that's crucial. I mean, I think what we would say, and in fact you said it yourself in your intro, is we police by consent, and I think, you know, we do have you know, an unarmed service, and we do rely on the public to support the police in the work that they do, and it might be through witness appeals or investigations or what have you. So I think that, you know, it's absolutely essential that the public have that confidence in the police service. So the reputation issue is one that's extremely important to us. I think my role in terms of working for the Association of Chief Police Officers is ensuring that we communicate to the public that very complex role that we have. I mean, policing is a very complex profession, and I think that quite rightly most people's experiences are summed up by either their own experience or that of friends or the media, and that's the very visible part of policing and sort of the Bobby on the beat sort of stuff, which is extremely important. But I think as APCO, what we're trying to sort of make sure that people understand is that there's a huge invisible part of policing, and it's really important for the public to know what we're doing to keep them safe in areas such as serious and organised crime, cybercrime, online crime, and sort of counter-terrorism. I mean, that's a huge part of our role. So absolutely, in terms of reputation, you know, having the confidence of the public is crucial to that effective policing.
Okay, change the topic here. How do you plan for a crisis? So how do you determine when an incident or public order issue escalates into a reputational issue or crisis? There's no name to that one. But
I mean, what I would say is that the police service, along with our partners, the one thing that we do extremely well is planning to deal with that crisis, and we learn from each major incident and issue that comes up, and that learning is then fed through. I would say that we plan so very well, but of course when it comes to the actual event, nothing ever goes according to how the plans are. So you have to be agile as well. But in terms of how we manage a crisis, now obviously in Norfolk and Suffolk we didn't actually, thankfully, see any public disorder on the scale that we saw elsewhere, but nevertheless we still ran what we call a gold group. So because we're a uniform, hierarchical, rank-conscious organisation, the person in charge is what we call the gold commander. Then there's a silver and bronze. Now that gold, silver, bronze was also then replicated in my communications team. So again, I was running a cross Norfolk, Suffolk gold communications service. And of course, that's how it works. It's, we actually do have manuals written that guide us in how we do it. But of course, I come back to the point I made at the beginning. Nothing is ever scripted like that, and things always happen differently. And at each and every turn, and this time, the big learning is around social media. We then learn and then go back and tweak those plans. But the public can be reassured, and it's one of our key messages during any kind of serious event, be it Asian flu epidemic, because again, we would be working with partners on that too, because there'd be implications for the public services. We actually do have some very well-rehearsed, well-practiced plans that are aimed at keeping the public safe and protecting them from harm.
Well, we touched it. So I was just going to say, we touched on it earlier, Andrea, about obviously the summer, but how's that impacted on your crisis planning?
My first advice is don't let your boss go on annual leave to the south of France where he can't get back, or your head of media either, because she was in Australia. So, I mean, I think best laid plans is probably the phrase, isn't it? Because you can plan for these events as much as possible, but in the event that it's in the middle of August, which allegedly is always a quiet month, you can have sort of less resources, and you have to sort of work within the sort of parameters that you've got. I think from our perspective, I think what's really important, and we're doing a lot of this around the Olympics planning, particularly for communications, is testing. I mean, I've been part of exercises recently, and will be part of a nationwide exercise at the end of this month around Olympics planning, and a big part of that planning is not just our operational capability and our response, but it's about how we communicate, how we work with the media, what sort of issues might we have to deal with. So I think that's a big part of it, is planning and testing, I should say. And I think also one of the things that we do at APCO, and one of the pieces of work we've been taking forward, is looking at mutual aid. So in the same way that you saw all this talk of mutual aid from an operational perspective during the recent riots, behind the scenes there was also mechanics in place to make sure that force communicators were sharing mutual aid, and where there were needs because people were on leave or because they were perhaps busier with kind of big events, at APCO we were able to facilitate that and kind of call up, I mean it is almost as simple as that, but calling up sort of regional kind of fellow colleagues to say, right, we need X number of press officers or web specialists or whatever, and providing that additional support.
And that's where APComm members were obviously only too pleased to assist as well. And of course, on a local, more regional basis, we're currently assisting through mutual aid the event that's going to be happening in Essex. There's been a lot of, it's been in the news around Dale Farm. Now clearly, that's an issue that could take up a lot of resource. So for particular issues and items, we will work together and help each other. That's very important.
Just wanted to touch on, conscious we're getting to the end of the show, about the police cuts that we spoke about in the introduction. How do you think that will impact police communication? Will you be using social media a bit more? What's the thinking there?
The impact of the cuts has been pretty devastating on many of my colleagues across the country. And if I look at my own circumstances, in terms of we've now joined two teams from Norfolk and Suffolk into one. We've now reduced from what was in place 55% of fewer resources that we now have. Now that's a very significant chunk of resource. So we're having not just to do things differently, we're actually re-engineering the business. which is why social media is going to be increasingly important to us, because it is a way of reaching the audiences and the people that we probably otherwise couldn't reach. So it's phenomenal change that's happening within the police service, as Andrea mentioned earlier. It's change on an unprecedented scale, which means that actually we're having to change in ways that we couldn't possibly really have envisaged, and that in a way is a massive challenge, but it's also quite important for us, because it's different. It's not been done before. That's really the challenge, and somehow we've got to make that work. But that's a picture that we're seeing across the country. Reduced resources, and forces are doing different things to be creative and overcome those shortfalls.
Is the traditional forms still just as important as a broadcast? You know, your televised press conferences. What about local and community radio stations? There's a lot more listening on community radio stations now, do you?
Yeah, the media will always be a very important audience for us, and typically our campaign and our plans always include the regional media, regional TV, as well as very local broadcast and news media and online. We're actually looking at a whole range of media, and we're choosing the ones that are most appropriate to the message and the campaign, as you would expect. Yeah. But if the traditional media is going away, it's changing, but it's still there. It's morphing into something slightly different. So our newspapers and our daily regional newspapers, they're now 24 hours online service. So our stories that we're putting out, we're seeing online sort of some hours before the newspaper's actually published.
I mean, I was going to say, in terms of that sort of broadcast issue, I mean, I think we would develop sort of kind of a national position, and we would share that with forces and really encourage them to do local media. I think what you saw in the recent riots was, certainly from the Cobra meetings that I was attending, was there was a real desire and an appetite on the part of politicians to ensure that public figures, authority figures, and that thus being the police service, were out there sort of making sure that people felt reassured and felt protected. Now that was at a national level, but it was also very important at a local level. And I think what we're very keen to do, particularly through social media, because it is sort of a free medium after all, is to empower police officers, empower our staff to actually be our ambassadors and actually to use those mediums themselves too at a local level.
But what it also does is also allow the communication chain to come back as well. It's two-way.
Sure.
Whereas a lot of our traditional media channels were sort of just posting information. Now we're having conversations and developing relationships. That's the exciting dynamic, really.
So I was going to say, for the most part, that's great that you're having a dialogue with people and two-way conversations. We have got a question in from Claire Wheatcroft, and she's asking, to what extent is citizen journalism and photographers a police communicator's worst nightmare? So she's gone, in other words, people with a thirst to be the first to break the news, but with no rules to play by. So are they a pain for you, or was that one of your key learnings that you developed from the riots? You were talking about the rumours earlier and that kind of thing. So how would you handle a rogue reporter?
Well, I think citizen journalism now can come in so many different forms, and actually you treat them like you would any other member of the public, and therefore we have well-established sort of systems to deal with it. Of course we are looking to protect the reputation of our organisations, and occasionally we do get people who, for their own personal reasons, want to try and sort of spike our guns or create some problems. But as I say, to be honest, you know, it's just part of the day job. I won't personally say that has caused us any particular issues, but it is this whole volume of social media. More people are getting in on the act, and actually I think Andrea mentioned earlier, we're going to need a whole bank of people if we're going to monitor that. With the cuts, that's not going to be possible. So we're going to have to pick and choose where we play. Okay,
well, we've almost been on air for half an hour, so this has gone very quickly, but we've time for one last question, which if you can give us like a quick, short answer to this one, but it's an important one because it's all about measurement. So it'd be interesting to know how both of you measure the success of work that you're doing, any particular campaigns. Could you
Well,
sort of touch on that?
I think that really for forces, I mean, you know, I know there are lots of good examples of good practice out there where they will do surveys and do evaluation of projects and marketing campaigns and things like that. My fear is that with all the budget cuts, that's the sort of thing you're going to see go, and it's going to make it, you know, it's intrinsically difficult to measure success anyway in communications. I think we all find that quite difficult. I think for me, the overarching success is about confidence and about trust, and I think if we can maintain the confidence and the trust of the public as much as we can, then I think that says that somewhere along the line, hopefully, we're doing our jobs properly.
And I would support that absolutely wholeheartedly, because I think our message from the police communicators to the senior team, the senior officers, is that actually there is a direct correlation between the quality communications that my members produce and the rise in confidence of the public. That is, yeah, that's what it's all about.
Excellent. Well, that's a nice way to finish. So thank you so much. That is all we have time for. So it's actually shot by, and as I said, we've been on air for over half an hour, I think. So we'd like to thank both our guests, Anne and Andrea, and a quick reminder to viewers that the CIPR has actually partnered with APComm to offer their members a significant subsidised CIPR membership subscription. So for information on that, do go to the website, the CIPR website.
So thanks also to you for watching, and to the production team here at Marketeers 4DC. Before we close the show, we wanted to let you know that the past CIPR TV shows are now available on iTunes, and you can subscribe to our feed by going to the iTunes store and searching CIPR TV. It's a great way of getting the shows directly to you, and if you sign up, it will help us rise up the business podcast
Absolutely,
charts.
we want that #1 for Christmas. Now, we also wanted to give a quick plug to 2 other events being organised by the CIPR social media panel. Tomorrow night, Lewis Wiltshire of BBC Sport is this week's presenter of the CIPR Social Summer. He'll be talking about social media, sport and London 2012, and that starts at 5 PM and costs just £10. So make sure you get to that. And on November the 14th, we're also running the CIPR's digital conference. So again, check the website cipr.co.uk for more details, and you can book onto both of those. Next month, CIPR TV will be live at 5 PM on the 6th of October, when we'll be reflecting on the party conference communications, and our guests will be Simon Goldie of LexisNexis, Ian Anderson of Cicero Consulting, and John Leehole of Insight Public Affairs. So make a note in your diary for that. But until then, goodbye.
Right.